In a continual effort to develop something of a taste for Regency dress, I thought maybe the easiest way to make a Regency gown that sings to my soul is by baiting myself with the promise of goth-flavored eleganza. So, I guess that's what we're up to today. I found a bodice shape I didn't mind in the treasure trove of Janet Arnold, which is my go-to source for extant garment reference, and began drafting that out. With the pattern translated to life-size paper, it's time for me to make a mock-up and see if this actually fits. I love a project made up of a bunch of little pieces like this because it means that I get to recycle scrap muslin bits from old mock-ups to make this up. But there's just something so satisfying about getting to use materials until they are literally dust. Anyway, since the mock-up was basically a straight-up pattern from an extant original, it wasn't going to fit precisely. So with a bit of side seam alteration and a quick strap adjustment to get the waist up to period-appropriate height on me, I was pretty content with where it was going. Before we get cutting, this lady must first take some air by completing her exercise routine set out by this video's sponsor, Trainwell, formerly known as Copilot. Trainwell is an app that makes fitness easy by combining the personalization and accountability of a real human expert with the flexibility of modern technology. I've been using Trainwell since last September and I absolutely adore it. It is really the first thing that's actually got me to stick to a regular exercise routine because I know there is another real, actual, live human being behind the screen who's holding me accountable for actually doing these workouts and cheering me on as I make progress. It's really tailored specifically to you. You get to decide what kinds of exercise you want to work on, how many days per week, and how long you want your sessions to be, what areas you want to focus on. And your coach is always there working with you one-on-one according to how you like to be coached, whether you like to be pushed or whether you like to just be encouraged. My strength and stamina have improved so much over the last few months since I've been working with my trainer, Leslie. I'm feeling great, and I've actually developed an enjoyment for working out, which are words I never thought I'd hear escape my lips. Truly, Trainwell makes it so easy and accessible to just jump right in and immediately start molding your experience according to how you prefer to work. And while lately I've mainly been working on some strengthening routines to help keep fit and healthy, Leslie's also given me some extra stretching routines for those long sewing days when I'm spent curled up like a prawn. I have already, behind the scenes, recommended Trainwell to so many of my friends because it has just been such an asset to my life this year. Click my Trainwell link down in the description box below to get 14 days free with your own personal trainer, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I have. This is why I can't be trusted in a gym. Feeling refreshed, I can then mark my mock-up so that I can translate those alterations back to my paper pattern and have that all ready to go for cutting out in real fabric. The main fabric will be this black loose weave silk, which was kindly given to me by my friend Zach. It's got some weight to it, but it is still super drapey, so it should make up an ideal flowy Regency style gown. I don't know, but I definitely trust Zach's Regency senses slightly more than my own. I'm cutting a lining for the bodice out of this leftover black linen. Linen was indeed super common for linings in this period. Maybe not black linen, but such is the nature of this project. Now I'm going to lay my lining pieces on top of my fabric pieces and baste them together to hold them temporarily until I can stitch them into place. We are in some cases fully lining dress bodices in this period, but this interlined and seam finished method is also used, despite seeming to be a bit more common in the previous century. This pattern is, after all, slightly more 18th century than Regency. The original garment from which Janet took the pattern was a Regency half gown made from an older, possibly originally 1760s gown, so I quite like the idea of sticking with a slightly more antiquated vibe for this. The rest of the silk gets laid out on the floor for skirt assessment, and the scraggly, uneven part I was using for the bodice is just being cut off. Thankfully, the chonky weave of this silk makes it really easy to cut along a single grain line by eye. I know it doesn't look straight here, but that just goes to show how much fabric is capable of warping on the bolt. This will ensure that I have a nice, straight hanging skirt, hopefully. The original pattern is made up of 4 18-inch wide panels that get pleated up at the back. But the pieces aren't selvage to selvage like a lot of historical dresses are, that is, using the entire width of the fabric, which would have been much narrower than most of our fabrics today. The skirt panels were cut into these 18-inch panels, probably either due to its being refashioned from another garment and probably to accommodate its wrap-over nature. But since my garment is going to be a full dress, not a half wrap, and thus not closing down the middle, I'm going to smoosh these into 2 36-inch panels. Before I put the bodice together, I'm first just taking a minute to put a hem on the top edge of both bodice pieces as well as the bodice linings. These will be free floating, so we'll need hemming, and they're going to be much easier to do now than when the bodice is made up. The bodice is, in fact, made up by backstitching the pieces together with some strong silk thread. And the raw seams are finished by turning and felling, as was common for this period. Since I've got quite a few layers here, I'm trimming away everything but the topmost layer, which will fold over the under layers to encase them safely, hopefully as unbulkily as possible. I'm turning all of my seams toward the back, as once again this is pretty common historically, but for some reason I've chosen to split the center back seam here and fell those each individually for artistic reasons or something. I have no historical basis for this, just vibes. The front bodice piece gets this little half belt thing across the bottom, which doesn't extend to the back. On the original jacket, it's a separate piece that closes over the bodice, but I've elected instead to attach it to the bodice itself and to have the whole piece overlap closed together. I'm leaving these belt seams raw for now. I do have a plan for finishing off these edges later, which we will get to in a bit. So this piece gets connected into the main bodice piece at this seam, and these two both go together but exist floating separately. And I'm thinking, because this will attach, the lining layer will hook together, and then this will go over it, I'm thinking that this will freestand from the skirt. So this is going to need to be hemmed, and this is going to need to be hemmed at the center front edge and the bottom edge, which is going to be easier to do if I just hem this now before I stitch it in. With the front lining pieces fully finished off now, I can line up this lining piece with the outer front piece along the side seam and arm size so that I can attach them to the rest of the bodice. Now that the bodice is mostly together, I'm going to give a little attention to the skirt by seaming together the side seams. I cut these panels cleverly with one edge on the selvage, but the opposite edge from the front to the back panels. So that way each seam has one selvage edge to turn over the matching raw edge for super easy seam finishing. The panels are stitched together first though. I'm using a combination stitch here, which is a few running stitches punctuated by a back stitch every now and then for security, although lots of extant skirts pre-sewing machine are just slapped together with a straight up running stitch. These seams really don't need to do anything fancy or to take any strain, so they really only need to be tacked together. Strength isn't an issue here, and they are long, so speed is definitely usually the desirable factor. I personally just feel more comfortable with the security of the occasional backstitch, so have gone the combination stitch route instead. And it's back to the bodice, where it's time to test out my sleeve pattern by whipping up a little mock-up version and basting that in. All looks good, and I was all set to get started cutting that out once I very quickly wrapped up this casual, unrelated call with Indian embroiderer extraordinaire Maayankraj Singh for an entirely different video. Subscribe and stay tuned. Except, suddenly everything changed.
Maayankraj is literally just decided to make an embroidered overgown for this Regency dress.
I'm sketching it right now. Why didn't it occur to me before? Well, you never told me that this is for Jack's ball. So there you go.
Oh my god, that's gorgeous.
So poofed up sleeves here, embroidery here, around the neckline, and then all the way through with the trail.
Oh, stop!
In black chiffon with golden and silver sequins.
Perfect.
So you don't have to add your sleeves onto it.
This is perfect. I've literally just drafted the sleeve pattern right before this, pinned it in place, and decided I'll cut it tomorrow. You are my favorite person on this planet.
Of course I am, my dear. I will add small jewels in the embroidery.
Perfect.
What is your favorite motif in Flora?
I'm so into like Victorian, like Gothic.
Do you want a crow?
Oh my god, crows, yes! I love corvids, magpies, crows, ravens, all of those, I will, yes, gladly.
I'll dispatch it. It takes a week for anything to reach England. So even if I dispatch it on the 2nd, I'll get to work tomorrow.
This is unbelievable. I'm dying.
Oh, don't die, you have to wear this gown, then after that you can do that.
I'm metaphorically dying.
You mustn't do that.
Maayankraj may or may not have taken it as a challenge to demonstrate the full, not that I doubted in any way, the full capability of him and his glorious team in the speed and skill at which they are capable of producing entire, spectacularly embroidered gowns. So the new plan was to use the dress that I'm currently working on as an underdress and to wear Maayankraj's version as the spectacular overgown. Which means, since my gown will function like a Regency-era petticoat, it should be sleeveless. I can't often say it's sad times to get rid of a sleeve. So with the sleeves sufficiently yoked, I'm just hemming these arm's-eye edges off so that they are nice and clean. Now that I have a bodice pretty much together, I'm going to add on the gathering button detail at the straps to give the neckline its shape. First by stitching one of the decorative buttons into place on one side of the strap, then working a button loop on the opposite edge to draw the two edges together and to create that gathering. Theoretically, this isn't actually going to be seen, and I theoretically wouldn't have to go through the extra step of putting in this detail, but first of all, I just enjoy doing it. Second of all, it makes the dress look nice, but third and most importantly of all, this is what gives the neckline its shape, and if I didn't put this in, the neckline would be very boring. So I did have to put some sort of tack at the low shoulder point here, and I might as well make it pretty as I do. Well, this did turn out to be much more of a tedious process than I anticipated. Getting the placement of the button and the length of the button loop just right so that they created an aesthetically pleasing gather pattern took a lot more trial and error than I expected. I ended up having to measure the button loop length live on my actual meat form to ensure that the gathers were nice before removing it and working the final loop with buttonhole stitches. The whole process for both sides ended up taking around 4 hours to trial and complete, for a detail which, of course, will be completely unseen. But, oh well. It does of course also mean that this gown will be perfectly wearable and perfectly enjoyable on its own, even without the overgown, so I can get lots more wear out of this on other occasions beyond just the one for which it is intended to be worn. Oh yes, and I never did finish off that belt attachment, so I've just folded and pinned some strips of the linen lining over the raw edges and am felling those into place. Hi. This skirt is made up in 2 panels, which I think was a mistake. I shouldn't have done it that way because I pleated up the back panel to fit to the back portion of the bodice. The front portion, this crossover bit of the bodice, is not going to be attached to the skirt because I think I'm going to have it be an apron-front closure, which means that the skirt only gets attached from here back. So I've pleated up definitely the whole back section and then a little bit of the front section to as much as would fit in here as possible. And then what I'm gonna have to do, I think there's like the perfect amount that is remaining for the front that's like enough to cover the front plus a little bit it's gonna get some sort of apron, like apron-like ties at the top to wrap around the front and then to have a little bit extra to tie in the back, which is exactly what I need. I think I have just enough to do that here. So I'm not gonna pleat up any more into the back. Okay, here is where we are at. We are very nearly done with this. I have attached the skirt to the bodice, which I explained earlier. So very often, and this is something that the 18th century does quite frequently, they would pleat up the skirts, attach them to the bodice, just like this, and then they would just leave them raw. And I can kind of see why. It's because turning and felling this seam is going to be a chonky nightmare, and you don't want to push the seam up this way, because then you end up with bulk right where the bodice is supposed to be smooth. You would want to push it down into the skirt. However, these skirts are very often, more often than not, single layer. And so when you go stitching into that, you're gonna end up with a row of stitching like just down here, which might not be visually ideal. The silks that they were working with historically were very tightly woven and weren't as prone to fraying as a lot of our historical fabrics are today. It was just fine to leave them raw. So this is all finished. I also went through last night and hemmed off these opening slits. I think this should give me enough room to get into the garment. I have this cotton tape here, which is, I think, acceptable for our historical purposes. Just sort of fold this in half over top of this top edge, which will give me a nice, clean, finished edge on this. So this is not prone to fraying. And then I'm going to carry this binding off for a couple of feet, I guess, aside from that, so that I have ties for the apron. So this can go around the waist, tie in the back, this closes over the front, and you have a Regency gown. The front tie string is attached super simply by felling the one half of it to the one side, folding it over the raw edge of the skirt, and then felling it down to the other side in the same way. And now, I guess, it's time for closures. I'm only putting hooks on the front crossover piece. The bodice lining and the first bodice crossover will be pinned into place, as was a very common method of closure historically, and the one I often prefer since it allows for on-the-day sizing. The outermost layer, though, I felt needed a proper hook closure since it'll be seen and a pin will probably be too conspicuous here. Which is such a disappointment because sewn hooks means that you actually have to commit to a size with very little room for fluctuation, but we do what we must. And the last and final step, the hem, which is done in the manner of the rest of this project by turning and felling the narrowest fold I can get out of this fabric, which admittedly isn't the narrowest hem in the world, but is sufficient for this purpose. So I'm about halfway through done putting the hem on, which is the last stage of this dress. However, just had a very exciting notification that a very special package has arrived, so we're gonna go hunt that down. Oh my god, my heart is racing. Oh my god. Oh, he sent some ribbon, extra ribbon for the hair. Oh my god, this is gorgeous ribbon. I'm not emotionally prepared for this. This might be the fanciest thing I've ever put my hands on. Oh my god. Oh my. Wow. Oh my god. Oh my god. Wow. Oh my god. The train. She needs to go on a dress form. He's called it Chandri. I hope I'm reading that correctly. It translates to the rays of the moon which illuminate the world beneath her feet. So magical, but wait, there's more. I was quite doubtful when the team nodded their approval, but they have never let me down and it has been proved true. They always have my love and respect. I have asked them to embroider their names along the hem. I hope you find them with blessings of you being the belle of the ball. That is so cool! I have never, as much as I love the entire design of this robe, and I love the ravens at the bottom, the names are the highlight of this entire garment. It's gonna be such an honor to get to wear this to a period ball where these gowns were historically made by people whose names were just erased from history, and now they will be worn, they will be featured at a historical ball like this. It's gonna be such a magical experience. Oh my god. This project just got 1,000 times better. My undergown is also now finished, so I think it's time to see how it all looks together. Very rarely you start a project and know exactly how it's going to turn out from start to finish. The finished product is exactly what was in your head, and everything worked out according to plan. And then there are the much rarer occasions when the initial idea that you have in your head is nothing like the final outcome, but the final outcome is worlds better than what you ever could have dreamed up in your head. This project falls into that latter category. I was initially imagining in my head, a Regency court gown, something that historically would have been pretty spectacular to wear, but because of my time limitations, I wasn't going to have very much time to make it truly decorated and spectacular, to put the hours of hand-done labor in it that I really would have wished that I could have. And then of course, Maayankraj and his incredible atelier have come to the absolute rescue, so it was kind of an amazing amalgamation of the best of all worlds. Bringing in the expertise of multiple artisans in the creation of a project, I find, makes for a much more exciting project. Craftsmanship, labor, passion, expertise, it all really helps you appreciate the work that goes into a garment, to see the beauty in it, and thus, I think, to appreciate it more. My favorite part about this whole project has nothing to do with any of the work that I did, but it is the names on the train of the overgown. I did not ask Maayankraj to do this, but of course he knows how much I love celebrating traditional crafts and how much I love getting to learn about craftsmanship and techniques from other artisans. And so he thought it would be a nice idea to incorporate the names of all the artisans who worked on the embroidery of this gown right there, front and center, on the train of the gown with the main motif, in complete, unashamed, full frontal celebration of the work that these people did. To be able to attend a recreation of a ball like this, in a recreation of a gown like this, but hopefully not playing into the less desirable aspects of history, like bearing the names of the incredible artisans who work on the gowns like this. People like Maayankraj and his atelier who've been doing this kind of work generationally. I think he said for 12 generations, he and his team members have been working in this atelier. The same people, the same families, passing down this knowledge generation after generation for hundreds of years. These are the people that would have been making gowns like this for the people who got to attend these balls. It's just such an incredible experience to have got to work on this project, while also ending up with a final product that showcases the work of other incredible artisans and that looks spectacular. That is an amount of work that I could not have pulled off on my own. I always say Regency is not my favorite, and then I get to work on a project like this and subsequently, inevitably, find so much about it to love. Don't forget to check out Trainwell down in the description box below if that sounded of interest to you, and I shall see you for more historical sewing adventures anon.
Dead ankle. Work, slay.